Hi, my name is Rubidium. Welcome to another episode of Learning Curve. In this series, we try out different filmmaking technologies to get a sense of how difficult or easy they are to operate. Today we are looking at the gimbal handoff. Have you ever seen a shot in a movie where the camera seems to go through a wall or through a window? They probably used what's known as a gimbal handoff, where one operator carrying a camera on a gimbal hands the camera out the window or through the door or through a hole in the wall to another operator that then picks it up and continues the rest of the move. We opted to do this in a house, tracking with someone opening a door so that we had one long, smooth tracking shot of a person going from inside to outside. If you're using a larger cinema camera, this becomes much more complicated because if you have a full gimbal rig, you have to start then working out how you're going to support that weight and hand that weight off. For simplicity's sake, we decided to go with the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K mounted on the Ronin S. Now, our first attempts, we used just the Ronin S handle. With just one point of contact, there was a lot of vibration as the camera changed hands. So then we added the T-bar to the Ronin S, and that gave us 3 points of contact where me, the first operator, could be holding on two of them. I could pass it off to the second operator who could take the other handle and the main handle, and then I could let go slowly so that the transition was much more seamless. It took us around half an hour to get the camera balanced, and it took us another half an hour to light the shot the way we wanted it. We used a Lupo Super panel in one corner turned up to bounce off the roof, and we used a very pole wall spreader behind the trellis of the doorway with a digital Sputnik Voyager tube bongo tied to the pole, so that would give our subject illumination and compete with the brightness coming in the windows. Now, I had never done a gimbal handoff before. I had actually not done that much gimbal work. Asan, who was the other operator, had done a lot of gimbal work, so I was able to rely a little bit more on him to pass the camera off to. Because the second half of the move was much more difficult, I had to go from one level to a second level as our subject came down the steps. I let him do the more difficult part and passed off to him from the easier. The first problem we encountered is that the Ronin S wasn't big enough to both of us to hold at the same time. Adding the T-bar gave us more points of contact, more stability, and I was able to hold one handle and the center handle, and then hand off to Asan, who is handing the other handle and the center handle. This would also work with the Movi Pro style or the Ronin 2 style circular arrangement around a gimbal where there's lots more places to put your hands, there's lots more points of contact. Something that we inadvertently built into the shot that gave us more time for the handoff was Ian, our actor, opening the door. If he had just run straight out of the house, it would have been much harder for us to do the handoff, but because the door slows him down, it gave us time to slow down the camera move, get our hands in the right position, make sure that we could fit the camera on the Ronin under the windowsill, and then hand off to the other person and seamlessly transition from one operator to the other. You can do a couple of things to set yourself up for success if you're doing a gimbal handoff. Definitely use a camera and a gimbal that's far under your weight capacity as an operator or for the gimbal. If I had put my C200 on this Ronin S, which is right up against the capacity of the gimbal and is more likely to, for the gimbal itself to lose stability or lose balance, it would have been much harder. Choosing a much lighter camera and a much smaller gimbal meant that we had no problem at all moving the camera and operating the gimbal so that we were able to focus exclusively on the technical difficulties of the handoff. This also applies for the space that you're going to hand the gimbal out of. You know, we had about 2 or 3 inches either side of the camera and the gimbal, but when our CFast card stopped working and we had to add a SSD hard drive so the camera could record, that took an inch or 2 off again. So our tolerances were much, much smaller. In a perfect world, we would have had a big open window where we weren't worried about fitting the camera through so precisely, and we would have had a smoother handoff. The last problem we encountered was that going from interior to exterior, it was 4 or 5 stops brighter outside than it was inside. We were trying to work out how we could pull aperture or pull exposure or somehow adjust the camera down as we went outside. We didn't have the right equipment, and it would have been too hard to add that extra weight of a wireless follow focus to the small camera and small lens. So what we ended up doing is shooting the interior a stop or two under, knowing that we could then in Resolve, with shooting with Blackmagic RAW, change the ISO and fade between two clips, one at ISO 800, one at ISO 100. This is a great example of a digital exposure pull rather than a physical one on the camera. Because of the 12 stops at dynamic range, we were, not too blown out on exterior and not too dark on the interior. That is my look at the learning curve associated with a gimbal handoff. To summarize, it's best to start small, start with a light camera that's within your comfortable range of operation, and get as big a space as possible to hand the camera out of. I'd also recommend using the more experienced person receiving the camera rather than handing the camera off. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you next time.